The Middle Ages is remembered as an era of contradictions. It was an age of faith, chivalry, and monumental cathedrals, but also one of superstition, cruelty, and punishments that tested the very limits of human imagination. Among the countless tortures devised in that brutal period, some were designed to tear, crush, or burn, yet others were subtler, slower, and more humiliating. One of the strangest of these forgotten punishments was the so-called goat's tongue torture, a method that turned a harmless farm animal into an agent of agony. At first glance, the idea of a goat being used for torture seems almost comical. The animal, with its awkward gait, curious eyes, and insatiable appetite, is hardly the picture of terror. But in the hands of medieval authorities, even the goat's natural instincts could be twisted into a form of punishment that combined pain, humiliation, and endurance. It is this grotesque blend of the ordinary and the cruel that made the goat's tongue torture so infamous in certain corners of Europe. The process itself was deceptively simple. A victim, accused of some offense, perhaps theft, dishonor, or blasphemy, would be bound, often seated or laid down so that their bare feet were exposed. Executioners would then smear honey, salt, or another sticky and enticing substance across the soles of the feet. Sometimes, the substance was extended to other sensitive areas of the body, but the feet were the most common target. Then, the goats were released, driven by hunger and their natural fondness for sweet and salty flavors. The animals eagerly began to lick the feet of the restrained victim. At first, it might have seemed harmless, a tickling, irritating sensation that drew laughter from bystanders. This was often part of the spectacle. The punishment was meant not only to hurt, but to humiliate. The sight of a supposedly guilty man or woman writhing and giggling as a goat licked their feet amused onlookers. It blurred the line between comedy and cruelty, making the suffering into entertainment. But the laughter never lasted long. A goat's tongue, unlike a human's, is rough and abrasive. Over time, the repeated licking began to wear away at the skin. The soft flesh of the soles, constantly scraped by the animal's tongue, grew raw. The first layer of skin peeled away, then the next. Soon, what had seemed like a bizarre prank turned into searing agony. Victims screamed as the flesh beneath their skin was exposed. The nerve endings alive with pain at every lick. Worse still, goats could become aggressive in their pursuit of the honey or salt. Small bites, unintentional nibbles, or scraping teeth against the flesh added another layer of torment. Bound and helpless, the victim could do nothing but endure as the animals continued their work. The punishment was slow, lasting for hours, sometimes even repeated across days. In rare cases, when the flesh became damaged, infection could set in, leading to death long after the torture itself had ended. The goat's tongue torture occupied a strange space in medieval justice. Unlike the rack, the wheel, or the stake, it was not usually employed as a death sentence. Instead, it served as a form of corporal punishment or public humiliation, a warning to others rather than a final execution. It was most effective in small towns or villages where everyone knew each other. To see a neighbor stripped, bound, and subjected to the indignity of being licked raw by farm animals left a memory that would not soon fade. There was also a psychological element that made the punishment even worse. The tickling sensation of the goat's tongue at the beginning played tricks on the mind. Victims often laughed uncontrollably, their laughter mingling with their growing dread. As the pain replaced the laughter, humiliation set in. What at first made them appear foolish soon made them appear broken. This transformation, from comic spectacle to raw suffering, was part of the punishment's intended effect. It showed how quickly pleasure could turn to agony, how swiftly laughter could become horror. The choice of the goat itself carried symbolism. Goats were associated with gluttony, mischief, and even the devil in medieval thought. To be punished by such a creature was to be marked with shame. The sight of a person tormented by goats was not only funny but degrading, as though they had been reduced below the level of animals. This symbolism reinforced the punishment's purpose, to strip the condemned of dignity while leaving them alive to bear the mark of ridicule. Surviving accounts suggest that the goat's tongue torture could leave lasting damage. Victims often had difficulty walking afterward, their feet swollen and blistered from hours of scraping. In some cases, the skin was worn away so completely that even the act of standing became excruciating for weeks. Others were left with scars, reminders of the punishment that marked them long after their release. The torture also revealed the medieval obsession with blending spectacle and suffering. It was not enough to simply discipline a wrongdoer in private. Punishment had to be public, had to be shared, had to turn one person's pain into a community's lesson. The goat's tongue torture, with its mixture of humor, horror, and humiliation, was perfectly suited for this purpose. It turned the condemned into both clown and victim, an object of laughter and pity at once. Though it never reached the widespread notoriety of other methods, the goat's tongue torture remains one of the strangest examples of medieval cruelty. Its survival, in records and treatises, speaks to how unusual it was, standing out even in an age filled with devices of unimaginable pain. It proves that not all torture needed iron spikes or flames to leave its mark. Sometimes, all it took was the rough tongue of a goat, guided by human cruelty, to achieve the same effect. By the time Europe moved into the early modern period, punishments like the goat's tongue torture began to fade, remembered more in legend and curiosity than in practice. Yet its memory lingers because of its strange mixture of the ordinary and the horrific. Unlike devices forged in blacksmith shops or elaborate execution rituals, it used everyday animals and simple tools, turning the mundane into the monstrous. That ordinariness is what makes it so haunting. The legacy of the goat's tongue torture lies not only in its physical cruelty, but in the twisted psychology behind it. Where most tortures relied on iron, rope, or fire, this one took something familiar, an animal, that provided milk, meat, and labor, and perverted it into an instrument of agony. That inversion made the punishment both memorable and humiliating. Victims were not destroyed by a machine of war or a blade of justice, but by livestock, by creatures seen as lesser than humans. Humiliation was at the heart of this torment. In medieval Europe, social standing was everything. A man could endure a beating and still walk away with his honor intact, but to be laughed at, mocked, and reduced to entertainment in front of one's community was another matter. The goat, slobbering and licking while bystanders jeered, turned the victim into a spectacle of ridicule. Pain and laughter were weaponized together, and the cruelty of the punishment lay as much in the shame as in the physical damage. In many cases, the torture did not take place in private dungeons, but in open squares, markets, or military camps. Crowds gathered not only to watch but to participate. Jokes were shouted. Wagers were made on how long the condemned could endure, and children were encouraged to see justice done. Such communal cruelty blurred the line between justice and entertainment. Medieval society often used punishment to reinforce social order, and by making it a spectacle, every witness became part of the process. What makes the goat's tongue torture particularly fascinating is its gradual transformation, from amusement to horror. At first, laughter filled the air as the victim squirmed under the ticklish sensation of the goat's tongue. The condemned often laughed themselves, involuntarily, creating the illusion of levity. But slowly, as the tongue's roughness stripped away the skin, laughter turned to screams. The crowd's mood shifted with it, from amusement to discomfort, then perhaps to silence. As the reality of the torment sank in, this transformation mirrored the duality of medieval punishment itself, a mixture of theater and terror, entertainment and enforcement. The damage inflicted was not trivial. The soles of the feet are among the most sensitive parts of the body, packed with nerve endings. To have them scraped raw for hours was excruciating. Victims often limped for weeks afterward, their feet blistered, swollen, or infected. In some cases, permanent disability followed, especially if infections set in. The punishment was therefore not merely temporary. It could alter a person's ability to work, to travel, to live normally. It marked them physically as well as socially. Symbolism also played a role. In Christian Europe, goats carry connotations of sin, lust, and association with the devil. To be punished by goats was to be symbolically branded as sinful, as one who had descended beneath human dignity. This religious undertone added weight to the humiliation. It was not just flesh being stripped by the goat's tongue. It was honor, morality, and humanity itself being licked away. The punishment also reveals something about the medieval imagination of justice. It shows how the boundary between punishment and spectacle was often non-existent. Authorities knew that the fear of pain alone was not enough. People needed to see it, to remember it, and to tell stories about it. The goat's tongue torture was perfectly suited for storytelling. Its strangeness made it memorable, its cruelty made it effective, and its absurdity made it spread as legend long after the practice itself faded. By the 17th and 18th centuries, punishments of this kind began to disappear. Europe was moving toward more structured systems of justice, with executions and corporal punishments increasingly codified and less dependent on spectacle. Philosophers of the Enlightenment criticized torture as barbaric and ineffective. Devices like the rack, the wheel, and indeed the goat slowly receded into history's shadows. Yet the goat's tongue torture lives on in the imagination because of its peculiarity. It is a reminder that cruelty is not always grand or dramatic. Sometimes it is petty, humiliating, and almost absurd. But that absurdity only deepens the horror. The very thought of being tied down, feet smeared with honey, while goats slowly lick away the flesh is disturbing precisely because of its strangeness. It forces us to confront the creativity of cruelty, the way humans have twisted even innocent creatures into tools of suffering. Today, when we reflect on the punishments of the Middle Ages, we often focus on the spectacular. Men burned alive, broken on wheels, or stretched on racks. But the goat's tongue torture shows us another dimension, the use of humiliation, the fusion of comedy and agony, the blurring of punishment and entertainment. It reveals a society that found not only justice but pleasure in suffering, a culture where cruelty was normalized and where laughter could be as sharp a weapon as iron. Though forgotten by most, the goat's tongue torture deserves remembrance. It stands as one of the most bizarre punishments ever devised, proof that human imagination can turn even the gentlest creatures into participants in pain. And while goats are no longer used as instruments of torture, the story remains a chilling reminder of how far societies will go to enforce order, instill fear, and entertain themselves with the misery of others. In the end, the goat's tongue torture is not just a curiosity of history. It is a window into the darkest impulses of humanity, where suffering was not only inflicted, but shared, laughed at, and made into spectacle. And that, perhaps, is the most haunting truth of all, that cruelty, once made public, can disguise itself as humor, while its victims pay the price in silence, pain, and shame. If you found this story disturbing yet fascinating, and you want to uncover more of the strange, brutal, and forgotten punishments of history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Torture's Room, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next dive into the darkest corners of human cruelty. Every week, we reveal how past societies use pain, fear, and death to maintain control, and why these stories still matter today.